Sanitation in third world countries is no longer just considered a health issue. It's about dignity and human rights and why we can't seem to solve a problem that affects 2.4 billion people. And rivers in India and New Zealand now have the same rights as a person. And that has all sorts of legal implications. I'm Dana Lewis, and this is Insight. Welcome to Insight. Drinking water supply and sanitation in India, well, really, you can just call it a health disaster. And that's despite long-standing efforts by various levels of governments and communities to try and improve the situation. The country's last census results showed there were more households with a mobile phone than a toilet. Fixing dreadful sanitation in India and in many countries requires not only building lavatories, but also changing habits. Here's Insight's Yasmin Hartoon Diwan.
This is the Rakhi Mandi slum in Uttar Pradesh, northern India. It's just one of many in the South Asian nation where its occupants have little or no sanitation facilities. But India's problem with toilets is not just an issue for its slums. %70 of households, both in urban and rural areas, lack access to a toilet, creating a nationwide health hazard.
Manifestation of this lack of sanitation facilities, investment in sanitation is visible in India above all countries. They use the bushes, they use open gutters, they use fields, and a huge majority of them actually live in India, nearly 700 million. So if the global sanitation challenge is to be overcome, it is absolutely essential that this is tackled head-on in India, because that is where it is manifest in its most concentrated form.
It's not just disease that's a resulting problem. Communities can be left vulnerable to abuse. In 2014, the abduction, gang rape and murder of 2 teenage girls shocked the world. Aged 14 and 15, they had gone into fields in the dark because there was no toilet in their home. But greater efforts are being made by the Indian government to tackle the problem. Prime Minister Narendra Modi launched the Swachh Bharat Abhiyan campaign in 2014 to clean up the nation's streets, aiming to end its sanitation problems and make the country a safer place.
What can you tell me about the Clean India campaign?
It's a very ambitious and courageous sort of initiative on the part of the Prime Minister of India. There is a whole part to do with constructing and installing the facilities that is required. But that is only half the story, because the other half is that people's behavior and cultural practices also have to change, so that what is constructed, we are actually making use of these toilets that are constructed. You can have very well made toilets, but if people don't go and use it, it is as good as not having the toilets.
Critics say the top-down approach isn't working, and the government's cleanliness drive glosses over the connection between sanitation and India's caste system. Cleaning human waste falls to those at the very bottom of society.
As long as you have this casteist mindset of thinking that someone is there to clean, no campaign will get success in this country. They have to first clean their mind. There is not the garbage in the roads. The garbage is in their mind, that they have to clean first.
In a recent report, Human Rights Watch said more needed to be done on an international scale to confront the issue.
In 2015, the UN General Assembly passed a resolution recognizing the human right to sanitation as a standalone and independent right. There needs to be more done at the international level to identify what are state obligations related to the right to sanitation.
While India continues to grapple with its cleanliness, neighbouring Bangladesh has been widely praised for how it's tackled its own problem with sanitation.
The progress made there was phenomenal. Phenomenal in the sense, in 1990, about 34% of the population used to go for open defecation in the field, as I was saying. But last year, that number has been brought down to 1%. Persuasion, the motivation is coming from within the community, not because the government said or the Prime Minister said, because that is sort of imposed from top. Some of them will listen to it, but many will not.
For India's population, old habits will need to change fast if the government is to meet their proposed deadline to eradicate its issues with sanitation by 2019. But alongside initiatives like the Clean India campaign, more resources must be placed into educating communities on why there's a need for satisfactory sanitation. Not just in India, but for the 2.4 billion people around the world suffering from the problem. Yasmin Khatoon Diwan, reporting for Insight.
All right, let's talk more about this with Shanza Ali, who is the head of strategy at Global One, which is an international development charity that works extensively in water, sanitation, and hygiene around the world. And also with us on Skype is Sanjay Vijay Sikira, who is the chief of water, sanitation, and hygiene at the United Nations Children Emergency Fund, known as UNICEF. And Sanjay, maybe we can begin with you. You know, I mean, I've been in Afghanistan and Somalia and seen these instances of lack of water and lack of sanitation. And the first thing you really talk about is disease, typhoid, cholera.
Mm-hmm. Yes, that's correct. First of all, good afternoon, and thank you very much for having me with you on the show. Yes, I think one of the key things is that sanitation is fundamental to children's and human health. We estimate that about 800 children under 5 die every day because of lack of access to this what is a basic right. So disease and death, sadly, is at the forefront of our minds. But beyond that, again, I think as was mentioned in the film that we just played, it is an issue of dignity, and particularly for women and girls, and more than any other issue, invokes the concept of dignity particularly for women and girls. Yeah.
Shanza, your organization deals specifically with women and sanitation and why it's such a big issue there in terms of, as he mentioned, it's really a human rights issue and a dignity issue and a safety issue.
Absolutely. I think we tried to take the gendered approach and look at how women are disproportionately affected, because we have found that women are usually the primary sort of managers of water and sanitation in their households. And beyond that, if you look at the fact that women menstruate once a month, I mean, that completely changes the consequences of them not having access to clean water, safe and private sanitation facilities, or hygiene products. And I mean, because of that, we also saw in the film as well that there are many more consequences. Along with their dignity, it's linked to their safety and their health, and their well-being overall.
I mean, the numbers are off the charts, especially, Sanjay, when you talk about India. I mean, 70% of homes in India have no toilets. That's urban and rural. I mean, that's one of the figures bandied about. I mean, people don't realize that 7 out of 10 homes have no sanitation.
Yes, so we estimate that about 560 million odd people practice what we call open defecation. That means they don't even use a poor quality toilet. Now that's a huge number, and that's a large proportion of both India's population and indeed of the world's population practicing open defecation. I think one thing we can say is that in more recent times, the Indian government has made this a critical political priority.
Not the first time, though.
Well, but the first time at this kind of level, I think the leadership of the country is driving this, and I think one thing we've learned on these types of issues from countries that have done it in the past is that it requires sustained political leadership right from the top.
Shanza, let's talk about sustained leadership, because this is not the first time. And sometimes in first world countries, the public's eyes glaze over a little bit about this. I mean, people are concerned, but again and again, sanitation and water issues in third world countries, governments pledging to do something, and here we are. And it seems to roll from one decade to the next.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's an issue that's very kind of multifaceted. So you have the infrastructure element, and you have the responsibility of the governments to provide sanitation, and then you have this kind of idea of attitudinal and behavioral change as well. So in a lot of the countries that we work in, we also focus a lot on creating that sustained behavioral change and understanding where that should come from, because I think often we do it wrong. We introduce the infrastructure, but we don't focus on actually understanding why it might be important for communities.
What does that mean?
So, okay.
When we talk about like the class system in India, and
Yeah.
somebody should look after the problem and government kind of lets it roll on, what does that mean?
It means that we need to work from both sides. It means that we need to work at grassroots, but also at the policy level. And at the grassroots, it's important to recognize that different cultures and different traditions and religions understand their relationship to wash very differently. And you need to go to the heart of that to be able to create sustainable change where it's from both sides. You get pressure from the grassroots, and you also get that demand being met at the policy level as well.
All right, Sanjay, I want you to disagree with me because I painted a very bleak picture there, right? But I think when I hear some of the material that's been put out by UNICEF, in fact, there's been some pretty great strides in some areas of helping people, in the millions.
That's correct, and we can't belittle the progress that's been made. I mean, since 1990, 2.6 billion people have gained access to a basic level of drinking water, and about 2.1 billion people have gained access to a basic level of sanitation. Having said that, first of all, there are many millions of people, well, as you said, 2.4 billion people who still don't have access to even a basic level of sanitation. So there are hundreds of millions of people who've been left behind. And then the other point that we have to make is that we're talking about just a very basic level. Certainly under the Sustainable Development Goals that the United Nations and member states have just agreed, we need to go beyond just a basic level. We need to address issues that Shanza was talking about around sustainability, around behaviors. You know, this isn't just poor quality products for poor people. It's got to be facilities and services that are good quality, that people can afford.
I would just like to ask you, because we cover so much today about displaced people from Syria through North Africa and existing famines and on and on. I assume that is just aggravating the problem. People on the move trying to find food, trying to find water.
Yes, that's hugely challenging. I mean, in the famines now occurring around northeastern Nigeria, South Sudan, Somalia, Yemen, we estimate that about 27 million people lack access to basic water. And famines aren't just about food. Obviously, lack of food is a huge issue, but lack of water and basic sanitation are also factors that contribute and make a huge, significant contribution to the impact this has on people. And it is a huge challenge because not only are you dealing with the usual set of challenges that Shanza just mentioned around making sure that not just the infrastructure but the behavioral issues are also addressed, but you're doing so in a situation, in a context that's very often insecure and that's changing, and sadly,
increasingly so.
Increasingly so, as well as parties to conflicts where that's happening who aren't respecting the international norms of not damaging water and sanitation infrastructure.
Shanza, what's your kind of worldview on this and long-term view of it? I mean, are we making progress, or do we just resign ourselves to this turbulent world and say there's always going to be a couple of billion people that are suffering without water and sanitation?
I think it's fair to say that there has been a lot of innovation and a lot of thought that's gone into finding sustainable solutions to this problem. And I think absolutely with the emerging refugee displacement context, you're going to see a new host of problems coming up, but that doesn't mean there aren't new opportunities. So we've recently released a report on Syrian women's wash needs in Lebanese refugee camps. And that's been
I've been in them, and they're pretty horrendous.
Absolutely, and it was sort of looking at the idea that we work on water and sanitation in a humanitarian context, but we don't realize how it's so holistically interconnected with their dignity and their health and safety and well-being. And actually, you can do the very simplest things that will make the biggest difference to that. Simple things like having locks on doors, for example, on toilet doors. And so I think it's about innovation, and I think it's about coming together between different sectors to understand how we can find innovative and sustainable solutions.
Shanza and Sanjay, thank you both for joining us on Insight. Coming up, why some parts of the world are granting rivers the same legal rights now as human beings.